I'm Holly Wolford, and today is 7/21 Wednesday. So this is lab 1 for 482, and in this lab we were told to build a circuit that involved 8 LED lights and at least 3 different chasers or patterns. So here on the left you can see I have my 8 LED lights in kind of a rainbow order, as much as I could get. And here, down here, the red and the black wire is the power, the battery almost for this panel board up here. And then we have our lights that are connected to our resistors, and then our wires that tie them into the pins. So over here in the code, we are linking the LEDs to the pins. So you can see for the first red light and the red wire, 13, I just called it LED 13, and I'm saying this is at pin number 13. And I do that for all of them. I just named them this way because it was an easy way to remember it. Then, for the void setup, that's just linking the pins, the LEDs to the output. So now that the LED lights will turn on and actually output something. So next we start our void loop, and inside this void loop we have all 3 of our chasers. And the way I decided to set up these chasers was with a for loop, so that they would run a certain amount of times, and then once that certain amount of times was hit, which in this case you can see is n less than 5, they would stop and then move on to the next pattern. So the first pattern, I'm going to start my code here now and kind of just let the lights run a little bit while I talk through it. So the first pattern we have here, I turn on all of the LEDs, and you can see it's turned on because it says high. And I just decided for this pattern to have them all on to just set it apart a little bit more from the other 2 patterns that you'll see later. And so here at line 45, we have the digital write LED 13, and then it turns off, and it stays off for 750 milliseconds, and then it turns back on. And when it turns back on, we have LED 9 turn off, which is our 5th light here, the first blue one you see. And I kind of had it go like the first one, the 5th one, the 2nd one, the 6th one, the 3rd one, the 7th one, the 4th one, the 8th one, just because I thought it would be kind of cool to see that you don't need them to go next to each other. You can jump around a little bit, and they don't need to be consecutive. And then this same pattern was carried out throughout the rest of the code. And then at the end of the code, I have all of the lights turn off because the next 2 patterns start with all of the lights off and involve the lights turning on to create the pattern. And I delay it for 2,500 milliseconds just so you can have a big break in between the first pattern and the second pattern, just to kind of set them apart even a bit more. So moving into our second pattern here, we have that same for loop set up, and it's going to run 5 times. As you can see, n is less than 5. And for this pattern, we have 2 lights turning on at the same time, and I thought that would kind of convey and show that you can have multiple lights turn on and not just one at a time. And so I have the 2 middle ones turn on, the green and the blue next to it, and then it moves one out to the left and one out to the right, and they turn on and then they turn off. And so you can see it's LED 10 and LED 9 turn on by the high indicated here, give it 750 milliseconds, and then they turn off. And then 500 milliseconds, the next 2 turn on, and they stay on for 750 milliseconds, and then they turn off. And that pattern continues until they reach all the way to the right, and then it loops around 5 times, and then we move on to the next pattern. And so the last pattern is definitely the one that took me the longest. As you can see, it's about 300 lines of code. And same setup here, we have a for loop, and this time I only have it run 2 times because it's a lot longer of a code, and so it just takes a little bit longer, and you can kind of get the pattern pretty quickly, so you don't need to see it multiple times like the other ones. Um, so it starts with the very left one turning on, and then it turns on again, and then the orange one turns on, and then it goes red, orange, yellow, and then it goes red, orange, yellow, green, and so it keeps adding on one more. And so when you add that up, 1 plus 2 plus 3 all the way up to 8, that gives you 36. And so you need 36 times of it turning on, and then you also have to turn it off, and then you also have to delay it. And so that's why this code is just super long and super tedious. And yeah, so you can see 13 on here in lines 114 and 116, it turns off, then 118, it turns back on, 120, it turns back off. And now we have number 12, and 12 turns on, but then it goes back to 13, 12, 11, 13, 12, 11, 10, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, and you can so on and so forth. And then if you look in my code, there's a little break here at 259. We start it going back the other way. So now we're going to start at the very rightmost light. We're going to turn it on one time, and then it'll turn on again, and it'll go to the white, and then it'll go red, white, blue, red, white, blue, blue, red, white, blue, blue, green, and so on and so forth. And you can see that 6 on, 6 off, 6 on, 6 off, and then 7, and then it goes back to 6, 6, 7, 8, and then 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, until it does it fully all the way through. And a little difference between the first time it goes from left to right and going right to left is I have it as 500 milliseconds when it goes from left to right, and then I thought it could speed up a little bit more on the way back, and so I cut that time in half. And I also did that same thing on line 257 where I delayed it between going from left to right and right to left, just so you can see that bit of change. And as you can see right now, it's doing pattern number 3, so it's actually just making it all the way to the right side, and then it'll delay for a bit, and now the right one will turn on, and then it goes back, and it's making its way to the left. So yeah, and there's all the way to the end of my code. These were my 3 patterns and the way that I figured them out, and why I chose these patterns the way I did, because I think this last pattern shows you the repetition, and just kind of a different way of thinking about it than the other 2, instead of just doing a basic line across or whatever it may be. And here we are back to pattern number 1, just so that I can draw your attention to look at the lights now and see what it really looks like. And so you can see it's going 1, and then 5, and then 2, and then 6, and then 3, and then 7, and then 4, and then 8. And it keeps repeating that. And then here we are to the second pattern, which starts in the middle, goes out 1, goes out 1, goes out 1, and then comes back to the middle and repeats that, and where it shows multiple lights turning on at the same time. A couple of issues I ran into while coding this all, just especially having so much code for the last pattern. If I misspelled anything, or I forgot a parentheses, or whatever it may be, just one little mistake, it would give me an error. And then I had to look through all of that code trying to figure out what went wrong. But it did allow me to explore more of the errors that would pop up. And so when I see a certain error, to know, oh, I'm missing a parentheses here, or oh, I accidentally misspelled this word. And just get me more familiar with that. And another kind of roadblock I ran into is some of the patterns I was originally looking at doing, or just kind of experimenting with. Randomly, sometimes the code would like skip and jump, even though there was nothing in it, but you would see the light move from one to another faster than it did the first run through the for loop or the second run through the for loop. But on the third one, it would move at twice the speed for just one light to another. And so I'm not sure why that happened, but I was like, I'm just going to avoid it altogether and choose a different pattern. And I haven't seen that since, but I did see it in 2 of the patterns I tried to do. But yeah, this was my lab. Those were my 3 different patterns and how I walked myself through the process. And yeah, thank you so much for listening.